Hi-Fi and home theatre products have always run very parallel with each other because what we need them to do is different. But let's be honest, if you have a home theatre system, you probably listen to music on it. And a lot of hi-fi system owners these days want it to have HDMI ARC because their hi-fi system has become a multimedia system. So I feel like the gap between the two, the parallel lines, is starting to blur, it's starting to merge. It's the closest it's ever been. So times are changing and what people want is changing. So when Zidoo approached me to review their new flagship media player, the UHD8000, which is intended to be someone's music and movie source, digital source, all in one, it made me question, has hi-fi and home theatre finally merged? Zidoo are a Chinese manufacturer that I've been familiar with for some time, but this is my first Zidoo product review. Now there is a strong business link between Zidoo and Eversolo, and that definitely inspired me to want to do this review. And that also means that there'll be a lot that is familiar here if you know the Eversolo products well. But what is the UHD8000 looking to offer that is unique and different? Well, it's looking to combine high-end music streaming and playback with high-end movie or TV content, playback all from one unit that costs £1,099, which is not a lot of money given everything that it can do. But this might not be the only costs involved for you, so bear that in mind and I will get to that. Straight away, I want to point out that the UHD8000 is not a media streamer. So it's not intended for you to watch your favorite streaming services, Disney, Netflix, etc. Instead, it's intended for you to watch your favorite Blu Rays or 4K Blu Rays, but it does not have a built-in drive. So you will have to rip and store those movie files somewhere else. That is important to think about, and I will cover this. Styling wise, I think Zidoo have done a very nice job here with the front-facing aesthetic. It's not overly flashy, but it also comes with rack mounting brackets to allow you to install it into a traditional home cinema rack. And if you look at the 8000 next to the Eversolo A6, you can see it's much larger for starters, but you can clearly see there is a similar design language being used here, which I am more than fine with because I think it's nice. On the rear, there are a great amount of connections for all the intended use case situations. And from the rear, the 8000 very much resembles a disc player such as an Oppo. And you can see there are a number of key digital outputs, such as dual HDMI 2.1 that are isolated from each other, Zidoo say for better performance, and also dual USB outputs for sending music or a movie soundtrack to a DAC. And this feature I massively appreciated because of how this ties into a two-channel system use case. Speaking of DACs, you can see there is both single-ended and balanced analog outputs for using the fully balanced internal DAC. Coming back round to the front, there is a cool fold-down front panel that is surprisingly thick and well made. And it exposes two hard drive bays that accept up to 16 terabyte drives each for a total of up to 32 terabytes of internal storage. And the installation of hard drives is super simple, fully toolless, and the whole process or mechanism feels reassuringly solid in action. More interesting to me is what is inside. So I removed the lid and I was super impressed to see Zidoo are using multiple power supplies. It's using linear power supplies for the digital mainboard and the DAC section, and then it's using a separate switching power supply for the hard drives. And this grabbed me as an attention to performance detail I really appreciate. The 8000 is using an ESS 9069Q DAC chip, which is different to what's in the Eversolo A6. And of course, the A6 has just a single switching power supply. So that is another important distinction between the two, and I dare say there are many more. For playback, Zidoo have their own app called Zidoo Controller. but when you open it, it looks very similar to the Eversolo control app, which is fine by me as I'm already very familiar with it. This also means very comprehensive music streaming support for Tidal, Qobuz, Deezer, Amazon Music, Spotify Connect, Tidal Connect, AirPlay, DLNA, Plex, and more. And I am not an Apple Music user, so I checked with Zidoo and they told me and confirmed that the UHD8000 fully supports Apple Music lossless, which is fantastic, and you can also play Dolby Atmos music via the HDMI output for Apple Music so long as you have enabled the option in the menu. I am a Tidal user, and the experience of streaming music from Tidal using the Zidoo app was identical to the Eversolo app, so there is nothing more added here, but nothing lost either, which is great as the experience can be a touch cumbersome at times, but in the main it's pretty excellent compared to many competitor apps that I have used. And I also loaded about 700 gigs of ripped CDs to one of the internal hard drives, and the experience of navigating that music was very good. The album art would either be instant or maybe take a second to show up for big scrolling, and at first I thought it might be the mechanical hard drives just not being fast enough, because I am using quite slow drives that are only 5400 RPM. If I was buying drives new, I would have chosen 7200 RPM drives just to be sure. So this is one area where I think the A6 has the advantage, because you can install an NVMe hard drive into the Eversolo A6, which are lightning fast, and I do wish that was an option to install one here too. For sound quality, I have spent about the last 2 months using an Eversolo A6 as my digital music source. I'm not a fan of how the built-in DAC sounds, but as a digital music source, it's pretty good. And the built-in EQ of the A6 allows me to tune its sound to be much more to my liking, even as a digital source. And I have details for all of this on my Patreon if anyone is interested. And I was able to use the exact same, almost the exact same EQ for the UHD8000 to achieve the same sonic improvement. So that was great. Comparing the Zidoo just as a digital source, feeding from its USB to a high-end DAC, the Chord Electronics Hugo TT2, there is a lot that is similar with the sound quality compared to the Eversolo A6. But I think the 8000 sounds better in some key areas. And it's not a massive difference, but I think it sounded a little bit more pleasing, a little bit softer in its edges, a little bit more rounded and more solid and more sure-footed. Again, it's not a massive difference, so it could be placebo. But I think worst case scenario, it's definitely not worse than the Eversolo A6 as a digital music source. I actually think it's just that little bit better, which is great because it means someone could use it and they're not losing anything. And just to summarize the sound, I would say it's a good overall performer. So you get good timing, good organization, good soundstage, good tone and timbre, good bass, good vocal quality, good treble detail. Yeah, just a good overall performer. Not the absolute best, but good in all the key areas, which makes it, a good overall listen, something you can listen to for hours on end. And it was good sounding with my EQ turned off, maybe slightly better than the A6 with the EQ off, but I preferred the sound. I think it sounded better overall with my EQ turned on. Listening to the internal DAC, at first I was very impressed, as it didn't seem like I had lost much compared to the much more expensive Chord, but over longer listening sessions there was a noticeable difference in the overall presentation. But I don't want to take anything away from the 8000's internal DAC because, again, it's a good performer. It gives you a good clean sound with a nice soundstage, good tone, good timbre. It's quite a solid sound, which I liked. So there's a lot to like about the 8000's DAC, but it's definitely just not my favourite, which I think is, a fair thing to say. I did find that maybe it was a little bit over enthusiastic in the upper vocals, which stands out when you're listening to maybe some 80s music, which is not always, pleasing anyway, and it can make that situation a little worse. And this is where my EQ definitely helped. So the DAC, it's okay. It's not my favourite. It's not the best I've heard, but it's okay if you wanted to go that route and use it. And there is a lot of different DAC filter modes to choose between, and they all make a small difference. Linear phase has the best bass. Minimum phase sounded a bit more easygoing. In an ideal world, I think I would have had a bit of the minimum phase sound and a bit of the linear phase sound, but you couldn't have that through the there's too many really different DAC options that don't really make enough of a difference. I think it'd be better if there was just 4 that made really big differences. That would be better for me, and I don't think the naming helps either, but that's, that is what it is. So either way, like, it's a similar situation for me here with the DAC that's built into the 8000. I think it's equally as good as the DAC that's built into the Eversolo A6. As a minimum, I actually think it's a little bit better, but like, again, if you're going to use the DAC, you're definitely not losing anything here with the 8000 over the A6. But some of you might miss the touchscreen of the A6 because the graphics of it or the VU meters can look pretty cool if you sit close enough to see them. The 8000 has a more plain screen, more like a disc player, but it has a HDMI output, and that means you can have a play-in screen. And this is a major difference in what the 8000 is offering, because it offers a visual user experience where with the remote control you can sit and control your music selection through your TV. And the music player experience feels very different when you control it on the screen with the remote control. You can still use your phone to control things, but seeing it all happening on the big screen, and by big, it's 120 inches here, it's a very different and quite a cool experience. Then if you want the famous Eversolo digital VU meters or their spectrum graphics, you can still have them here on your screen. And even if you're using a small monitor like I am here, you can still see all this graphical loveliness much clearer than you'll ever be able to see it on the small screen on an Eversolo product. So for me, this is all still quite a gimmicky feature. I don't think the playing screen is, but like the big VU meters or, the big spectrums, it's a bit of a gimmicky feature really, but it can be quite a cool thing. And of course, like, the potential to develop this with loads of different options is all there if Zidoo want to go that route. Like, the diehard audiophile in me thinks you shouldn't have a screen on. You should, be the least amount of visual, stimulus when you're listening to high-end music, but like, it's fun, right? Sometimes having the playing screen there, the big VU meters, it can be fun. One negative thing I do have to say here is that the 8000, of course, offers us 2 different types of EQ, which is great, and I did use that, but there's no advanced room correction here like Direct Live. And there'll be some 2-channel users that are used to it, familiar with it, really appreciate and value what it does or what you can do with it, that would not want to be without it. So the fact there's no Direct Live built in here definitely is like a checkpoint down for me in terms of what the product's offering. But overall, for the music streaming, the local file playback support, i.e. CDs that I've ripped, for the features, the flexibility, the functions, the sound quality, for the price, I think the 8000's making a very compelling case for itself, even in a very crowded music server, streamer, digital source market. So that's really great. And that's before we even get to the best bit of what the 8000 is offering, which of course it's going to be its movie playback too, because that is where it really shines. So I have to ask the question, is it good enough to replace my legendary Oppo 203? Recently, I have found myself watching more streamed content than ever before. I think because it's just so convenient. But if I want the best picture and sound quality, especially for a movie experience, well then I'll still buy the 4K UHD Blu-ray. I know this is an older one, but I own absolutely loads of them because I think in most cases the disc, a 4K disc, is still our best quality source for picture and for sound. And I've always played them from my power supply modified Oppo 203 Blu-ray player because it's still, to this day, one of the best sources you can get for playing discs. So how does the Zidoo UHD8000 compare? Well, for starters, it offers us 8K playback, which for me feels more like a future-proofing feature, but you might see it differently. You might see need for that now. It will, more importantly for me, support all of the HDR formats. So HDR, HDR10, HLG, Dolby Vision, which is the most important one, plus all of our sound formats, Dolby Atmos, DTS:X, and it will play a whole variety of different media file types. So that's all really crucial. But the big benefit of a media player like this is being able to access your whole movie library really easily. So then when we think about the size of a 4K disc, it can be up to 100 gigabytes in size. Most of them are nowhere near that, but they can be up to that. So that's when having, I think anyway, up to 32 terabytes of built-in storage can make a lot of sense if you have a very large disk library. However, if you're starting from new, two 16 terabyte hard drives from a good brand like Seagate will cost you about £245 each on Amazon. So buying two of them at once is a big chunk more money. You don't need to buy two straight away because the 8000 will see them as independent individual drives. It doesn't set up any type of RAID array. So you could start with one and add a second later. And I wanted to rip my whole collection of 4K Blu-rays, and I have around 70 of them, and I knew there would be a learning curve for me here. It ended up being far more complicated than I anticipated. To cut a long story short, not every computer drive you can buy will allow you to rip 4K Blu-rays. In fact, most of the new drives that you buy today are designed to stop you doing that, which I understand for copyright reasons. But it's very frustrating when you're an honest person, you own the disc and you just want to host it on a player like the UHD8000. So you need to pay attention to this if you're new. There are a select number of drives that will allow you to rip the discs, but only after you have flashed the firmware on them. And I bought two drives before I knew this, and neither drive would work. So I would advise you, there are some really good YouTube tutorials on how to do this. I should have watched them first. I didn't know, which is why I'm mentioning it in this video. If you're new to all of this, check the guide videos first before you waste money or waste time. What I ended up doing was buying a drive off of eBay where somebody had already flashed the firmware. But the drive was designed to be an internal drive for a computer, but I wanted to use it with a Mac. So I also bought an external caddy, and the caddy plus the price of the drive, and I did have to pay a premium for the drive, I think in total it was about £220. So again, this is a big chunk more money, plus the hard drives, plus the cost of the Zidoo, which you might have to consider if you're starting from scratch. And then you need a software to be able to do the ripping. And I tested, I think, the three main ones. DVD Fab was recommended to me by Zidoo, but I found it to be very fussy for the drive it would accept. Even a drive that worked perfectly with the other two softwares wouldn't work with DVD Fab, so I can't recommend it for that reason. I purchased Liowa Professional Media because it looked like the perfect solution, but the big problem with this software was its very limited manual and instructions. It was only later I found out that it does not support rips for Dolby Vision, which makes it no good really for me and means I cannot recommend it, and I had to ask those guys for a refund. My last test was using Make MKV, which graphically looks the most basic of the three, and that did put me off at first. But in use, it's by far the best solutions. The disc rips seemed to be perfect, and they supported Dolby Vision, which was brilliant, and it only costs about £55, so it's very reasonable, with 30 days to test it and try it out. So it's a great overall solution when I think about it. And I would say it's a perfect solution, except I bought the brand new Furiosa 4K Blu-ray, and it wouldn't rip that yet, because you have to wait for the Make MKV library or their database to be updated, which can take a bit of time. So it's an almost perfect solution, but it was definitely the best of the three I tested, and it would be the only one that I would recommend. Then you have to factor in the ripping time, which initially was taking between 1 to 2 hours per disc for me, which is a really long time. But that's because the ripping software will, for some reason, see multiple layers of a disc, and really you only need the movie layer that has the chapters. So if you just rip that one layer, then you can cut the time down to around 50 minutes per disc on average. But it's still quite a long time when you think about it. And then you have the time it takes to send the rip file across the network to the UHD8000. So that was about 20 minutes per disc for me. So that's over an hour per disc. So when you're trying to rip 70 discs, it's a long, quite tedious, quite laborious, extensive process. So at first, this all does feel like a lot of effort and a lot of faff. So the big question is it worth it? And it's an unresounding yes, because the way the Zidoo, with its movie poster wall, lays out all of your movies or TV shows in a super cool, graphically rich way, all done automatically, it makes browsing your whole library a joy because it's all so fast and visually rich. I love how all the extra graphical information is displayed automatically for each movie, and how some metadata is introduced, such as the directors and the cast. I love how collections of movies are created automatically, so the library stays more concise to navigate. I tried my best to get as many discs onto the 8000 in the review time as possible, which ended up being all of them, but that did take quite some time. But I wanted to test if the system slowed down at all when more discs were on there. But I didn't really notice any change in the performance. Maybe it was a tad slower, but I really don't think so. And for storage, I was able to get all of my discs onto just one hard drive. And that was a part of my test, again, to see if the system slowed down and just to see how much data that would take. And 70 discs, of course, they're all different sizes, ended up being around 4 terabytes. Just to give you some idea of storage capacity and I suppose how many discs you can store on the internal storage. So 32 terabytes would give you a lot of discs. When you're playing a movie, the system is incredibly responsive to skip about the timeline or change chapters, or go in and out of different movies to select something else to watch. And this whole aspect of a media player is leaps and bounds better than any disc player. My Oppo delivers amazing sound and picture, but it's very slow and sluggish to use, and it makes playing a disc feel prehistoric compared to watching streaming. But that's not the case when you're doing it via a great media player like this UHD8000. It really is a joy to use because it keeps up with you. It never feels like it's getting bogged down in terms of the experience, and yet it still delivers a high-end player-like performance and experience. And I have to say the picture quality from the UHD8000 is exceptionally good. Perfect. I think it's better than perfect. Silly thing to say really, but the picture quality was just exceeded my expectations. It was excellent, absolutely brilliant picture quality, and I watched a lot of content. On a big screen, sat pretty close, you see all the flaws, trust me. But one thing that really stood out to me, which will be difficult for me to show you in this video because of the camera settings being different to the projector, but the movement of the image was flawless. And I've seen a number of maybe media players or computers play video files before, and the movement and the look and the image, it's just never seemed quite right to me. It's never seemed as good as a really good Blu-ray player like the Oppos, but the UHD8000 is just as good as the Oppos with just maybe even a slightly better picture too. Like, we're not talking again like a massive difference, but like the picture quality is outstandingly good. So it seems like Zidoo have done a fantastic job here for the playback picture and the sound. While I'm on sound quality, one of the features that I really love about the UHD8000 is that you can send your audio out through the USB, even for movies, which means it's only going to be stereo. But that means you could use the 8000 with your HIFI system, with the exact same HIFI system that you're using for music. So your HIFI system becomes your multimedia system without the need for HDMI ARC. So that means the HIFI system that you can use becomes infinitely more flexible, And if you have a really high-end DAC and a really high-end amplifier that's just designed for those things like I was using here, then you can get a great user experience without HDMI ARC. So that doesn't limit your choices. And I actually used an Audiolab 9000A. And one of the complaints about the 9000A is that it doesn't have HDMI ARC, but I didn't need it at all because I could use the USB input turn the volume up to maximum, and then control the volume with the UHD8000. And through the KEF, the old original KEF LS50 speakers, not the Meta, the originals. Let me tell you, of course, it's not an immersive sound and it's limited in terms of bass. But I watched loads of movies with the kids at school holidays and it was great. I really enjoyed every second of every single one for the sound. It's not immersive, but it can still be very enjoyable. So this is definitely one of my favourite features. Then jumping into the menu system, there are loads of options here to get everything set up how you want it. And I've seen some other UHD8000 reviews where they mostly just go through the menu system, so I'd recommend you check out other reviews if you'd like to know more. There are a couple of things I think that's important to mention here. Firstly, you need Samba turned on to be able to see the Zidoo on your home network, so pay attention to that. Secondly, there are some AI picture improvement features built in that are intended for improving 1080p and below picture. And I had a little play with these and you can select to see in the top corners what the AI features are doing. And I maybe didn't select the best movie to test this. The Ip Man collection is definitely one of my favourite movie collections of all time, but it's a very noisy image. And the AI was making that a little bit more obvious, despite making the picture a bit clearer. So I would only use the AI settings on their lowest. Did I prefer them on or off? I'm really not sure. But look, they're there. You can turn them on and off at your choice. And lastly, there is a cool feature for subtitles. You can have 2 different languages for starters, and you can change the brightness, size, and position of them. And I didn't really use this feature, but I can see it being useful for 240:1 projector screen owners where sometimes the movie subtitles are off the bottom of the screen. Or maybe having the subtitles larger is cheaper than buying glasses. So, to sum up my overall movie experience, I'm struggling to find anything too negative to say about the UHD8000. Yes, it wasn't perfect. I did notice that sometimes it would just get the disc wrong in terms of the metadata or the name and the title, and I would have to go in and manually correct that, which really is an easy thing to do, but I couldn't work out a way to do it with the app. I could only seem to do it with the remote control on the screen. So that was interesting. And sometimes it felt like the screen experience didn't quite fully marry up with the app experience, but the fact that I can go into the app, look through all the different movies there and select the movie to play through the app or through the remote control is a very cool thing, because each person would like to do this differently. And if you can't find the remote control and you can find your phone, you can still watch something. And one big potential negative of the whole situation here is the movie experience, and how that all is very much dictated by how you rip the discs in the first place. So of course there is some time involved in that, and I think there is some attentions to detail needed for the library management. Otherwise you can end up with ripping lots of different files that you don't need when you go to the movies. You'll have an A, a B, a C, a D, and an E, and it's like, you know, most of those sometimes end up being the same thing. So like the whole ripping experience, of course, is a major influence that it affects the whole thing, and it's still much more slow to do than just sticking a disc into a player. But I think having all your movies there all the time, there's more chance of you watching them and having to go and find a disc and playing it. That's what I've found. And actually, I've bought more discs in the few weeks of this review period than I have in the last years, because it's like, wow, I want to build that collection. I want to see this movie. I want to have this movie stored on this player so I can quickly and easily watch it whenever I want to. So having it all there all the time, it's something. Having the whole library there is what I mean, all the time. It is something that you cannot overlook in the modern world. When you can just go to streaming and watch anything you want, it almost makes discs redundant. And yet we don't want discs to be redundant, because it's still, you know, the best quality source. So I think having access to them really quick, really easily is a big factor. I do wish there was a HDMI input with this system. I would actually rather have the HDMI input than the built-in DAC, so that I could feed a streamer, some kind of maybe Apple TV box or something, through the same system. I personally would prefer that. However, if you're streaming already through your TV, HDMI 2.1 supports EARC, so you should be able to take the audio signal back to the Zidoo and then still out USB to your HIFI system. I didn't test that, but that hopefully should be a possibility. So where there's a will, hopefully there's a way. But having media streaming built into a player like this, I think would just take it up and make it so much better. Maybe it's not possible. And of course, a product like this only makes sense if you're still buying discs, if you're still watching discs. And like I said, I've bought more in a few weeks than I have in years, actually, funnily enough, since I've had this product here. So having something like this, as good as it is, it does encourage you to want to buy discs and encourage you to want to watch discs. And it's been fantastic for me through this few weeks of school holidays. The kids at home, we've had some great movie experiences on the big screen, on the big projector with pretty big sound. It's been absolutely fantastic. So like, not many products that I review make, or do I feel some like emotional attachment to, but I definitely have felt like this emotional attachment to the Zidoo UHD8000 because it's been not quite perfect, but like it's exceeded my expectations. It's delivered for music, it's delivered for a great music experience, it's delivered for movies, a great movie experience. Always fast, always snapping, really good picture, really good sound. And like I said, I could nitpick it. There's a couple of things missing, a couple of things that can be improved. I mean, it's had rune support added through this review period, which is, you know, a sign that things will get improved and yeah, updated over time. So it honestly, I think I have to give it my highest recommendation. If this is a product you think you can benefit from, it can do music for you, it can do movies for you, it can do TV shows for you, so long as you're still into buying discs. So I hope you enjoyed this review. I know it's very long. There's a huge amount to cover. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you found it useful. If you have, please hit the thumbs up and consider subscribing for more videos like this.